Los Angeles, 1962. The golden sun poured through the windows of the Whitmore mansion, as if it knew who ruled that empire. Each ray of light seemed to dance across the crystal chandeliers, reflecting off white marble and colored stained glass like a silent celebration of wealth. Inside, surrounded by fresh flowers, well-dressed maids, and absolute silence, lived Eleanor Whitmore, the only daughter of Charles Whitmore, a film tycoon who dictated the rules of Hollywood without ever raising his voice. Eleanor had just turned 18, but she carried the arrogance of someone who had never heard the word no in her entire life. Her blonde hair was perfectly waved, her dresses tailored straight from Paris, and her eyes were as cold as diamonds. She didn't smile out of courtesy. She smiled when she wanted to, and when she walked into a room, everyone stopped. Out of fear, admiration, or desire. She was engaged to Bradley Kingsley, the darling of the social columns. Son of bankers, heir to a fortune nearly as immense as the Whitmores, Bradley was everything Eleanor considered ideal. Handsome, arrogant, always surrounded by important people, and always by her side at parties. A couple tailor-made for the spotlight until the news came. The delay, the hidden test, the positive result. That day, Eleanor's world shattered like a crystal goblet thrown onto a marble floor. Bradley didn't answer the first call, nor the second. On the third, he picked up, and his reaction was a disconcerting silence. "You're joking?" he said, nervously laughing. "Do I sound like I'm joking? This can't be happening." He sighed, and his tone changed. "I can't deal with this right now, Ellie. My dad, my mom, this will ruin everything." "Ruin what, Bradley? Our perfect life?" "No, it'll ruin mine." And he hung up. Eleanor stood frozen for minutes. The maid knocked on the door, asking if everything was all right. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at herself in the mirror, still in shock, and felt the bitter taste of betrayal burning in her throat. When she told her father, Charles didn't yell. He never yelled. He just rubbed his eyes as if he'd been hit by an invisible punch and said, "They can't leave this house." "What?" "The pregnancy. Bradley is an idiot, but this won't destroy what I've built." "And what are you going to do? Lock me up?" "No, I'm sending you where no one will look for you. A town in the countryside, somewhere discreet. You want to hide me? I want to protect you. With a straitjacket? With a marriage." Silence. "You're selling me?" "I'm saving you, Eleanor. An old friend owes me a favor. His son is a decent, honest man. Lives in Texas. Runs a cotton farm. He'll take you in as his wife. You'll marry him as soon as you arrive." "This is insane. I'm not going," she shouted, eyes full of fury. "You are. A scandal here would destroy everything. It would ruin your name, your future. There, you'll be able to have your child and maybe to start over." Start over. The word tasted like poison. 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat in a train carriage dressed in a cashmere coat and dark sunglasses, with suitcases full of clothes that would never be useful on a farm. Sitting alone in the first-class cabin, she stared out the window and watched the scenery change, the luxury of Beverly Hills giving way to desert, to fields, to nothingness. She didn't cry. Eleanor didn't cry, but inside she bled. She had told herself 1,000 times this was temporary, that she would give birth, return to the city, to Bradley's arms, to her life, that all this was a grotesque farce invented by her controlling father. But deep down, a part of her, a part she hated, knew nothing would ever be the same again. Beside her lay an envelope with a single sheet inside, the name and town of the man she was to marry, Caleb Morgan, Willow Creek, Texas. She had no idea who he was. No photo, no letter, just the name, the place, and the promise. "He will take care of you." Take care, she thought bitterly, as if she were a cracked porcelain vase, as if she were fragile, as if he had that right. As the train neared its final station, Eleanor stood, adjusted her pearl necklace, and applied lipstick. If she was Going to be forced to surrender, she'd do it with her head held high. She wouldn't give anyone the pleasure of seeing her bow. But deep down, way deep down, her heart was racing. And it wasn't just out of anger. Outside, the Texas sky awaited. Wide open, hot, and unforgiving. The locomotive let out a high-pitched whistle as it approached the small station of Willow Creek, a dot lost on the Texas map. The wheels screeched on the tracks as if complaining about their own existence. The train slowed down gradually, leaving, behind miles of dust, pastures, and loneliness. Eleanor stood still, facing the door of the carriage. The cashmere coat already felt too heavy for the dry heat seeping through the cracks. She didn't know if the sweat she felt was from the weather or her nerves. The pearl gloves on her hands trembled slightly. With dark sunglasses on her face and her chin lifted, she was the image of elegance and resistance. "Miss," said the conductor kindly, "we've arrived." She simply nodded and descended the steps as if entering enemy territory. The platform was simple, worn wood, few people. An elderly couple, a boy with a bag of candy, a man carrying fresh milk in glass bottles. They all stared at her for a few seconds, as if she were an apparition from another world. And, in a way, she was. But then her eyes found him, leaning against an old olive-green pickup truck, wearing a short-brimmed hat and a light cotton shirt stood Caleb Morgan. Tall, broad shoulders, dark brown hair slightly tousled by the wind, and eyes that seemed to observe everything calmly. He removed his hat when he saw her, revealing a reserved smile and respect. Respect? She almost laughed. It wasn't common to be greeted that way. Not even Bradley, with all his forced charm, looked at her like that. "Miss Whitmore?" he asked, walking toward her. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Eleanor," she said curtly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Caleb Morgan." She didn't say nice to meet you. She simply glanced at the suitcase the porter was bringing behind her. "Is that your luggage?" he asked, trying to sound lighthearted. "Part of it. The rest will come on the next train. Of course." He signaled for the porter to load the suitcase into the pickup, then opened the passenger door for her. "Shall we?" She looked at the vehicle's interior as if staring at a prison. She climbed in delicately, sitting stiffly, eyes fixed straight. Ahead. The drive to the farm was silent, broken only by the sound of the tires on the dirt road and the engine. Caleb tried to start a conversation once or twice, but Eleanor replied in short sentences, staring out the window. "Never been to Texas?" he ventured. "Never had a reason to come here." "It's not like Los Angeles, I know." She looked at him for a second. "No, it's not." Silence again. When they arrived at the farm, Eleanor finally saw the house, a simple wooden structure painted white, with a porch and some flowers around it. There was a large tree nearby offering shade, and a wooden fence that marked the property. Before the cotton field stretched as far as the eye could see, she nearly sighed, in horror. Was this her new mansion? Caleb got out first, walked around, and opened her door. Eleanor stepped down, adjusting her dress and walking with firm steps toward the porch. As she entered the house, she expected chaos, dirt, clutter, the smell of animals. But what she found was something completely different. The floor was clean, polished. The white curtains swayed softly in the breeze. The scent of lavender hung in the air. Everything seemed to be in its proper place, with care. Embroidered tablecloth on the table, fresh flowers in a simple vase, and silence, a comfortable silence. "I didn't expect this," she let slip, almost without realizing. "My mother used to keep the house like this. After she passed, I kept the habit," Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe without intruding on her space. "I thought you'd like to stay in the back room. It gets more light and it's more airy." She looked at him with suspicion. "Are you trying to please me?" "I'm trying to make you comfortable. It's a tough situation for you. I know that. You don't have to trust me now. Just know I'm not here to force you into anything." Those words, spoken so calmly, had more impact on her than if he had shouted. Eleanor went to the indicated room. Indeed, it was nice. Made bed, white bedspread, large windows. It wasn't a hotel room, but it was welcoming. "Thank you," she said almost in a whisper. Caleb simply nodded. That night she ate in silence. The food was simple but good. Rice, roast beef, homemade bread. Caleb spoke little but always kindly, and when she stood to go to bed, he simply said, "Good night, Eleanor." She hesitated before responding. "Good night, Caleb." Alone in the room, sitting on the bed, Eleanor took off her shoes and looked at her hands. For the first time, she felt she no longer knew who she was. The woman who ruled parties in Los Angeles was now surrounded by silence, lavender, and a stranger who, for some reason, wasn't as easy to hate as he should have been. She lay down, closed her eyes, and before falling asleep she wondered, did Bradley think of me today? The Texas sun was already burning strong before 7 in the morning. The light came through the sheer curtains and spread across the room like a relentless invitation to reality. Eleanor woke up to the sound of roosters in the distance and the delicious smell of fresh coffee. She sat up in bed, her hair tousled and her face still creased from the pillow. For a moment she forgot where she was. But the different kind of silence and the absence of car noises or maids walking briskly down the hallway soon brought her back to reality. She opened the window and saw Caleb in the field, already working. Sleeves rolled up, hat on his head, calloused hands sunk into the soil. "How does someone wake up like that willingly?" she murmured to herself. At breakfast, the table was set. There was homemade bread, scrambled eggs, butter, a jar of jam, and the most fragrant coffee she had ever smelled, but no one was there. She sat down hesitantly, as if she might be breaking a rule, and began eating slowly. Caleb entered through the back door shortly after, walking calmly and with a sweaty shirt. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" he asked, grabbing a towel to wipe his face. "I did," she replied without looking at him directly. "Is the coffee how you like it?" "It's good. Different, but good." He smiled slightly, as if he knew that was already progress. "I'm heading into town today to pick up some tools. If you want, I can take you to see the place. It's small, but there's a fabric store, a pharmacy, and a little market." Eleanor scoffed. "And why would I want to see that?" Caleb didn't take offense. "Because you'll be spending some time here, and the sooner you accept it, the easier it'll be." She looked at him coldly. "I didn't ask to be here. I'm just following orders." He nodded. "And so am I. But here, orders don't mean shackles, they mean respect. You're not a prisoner, Eleanor, but if you want to live here like one, that's up to you." She remained silent, surprised by his polite firmness. That day, Caleb took her into town. The pickup truck rolled down the dusty roads while Eleanor kept her arms crossed and her gaze distant. Willow Creek was exactly what she feared. Small, quiet, with nothing resembling the luxury of Beverly Hills. People knew each other by name. An old lady waved at Caleb, who responded with a smile. A group of children played with old tires on the side of the road. "This is the town center?" she asked, incredulous. "Yep," he said without irony. At the fabric store, the owner, an elderly lady with white hair and a warm smile named Martha, looked at Eleanor with curious eyes. "Well, now, you must be Caleb's new wife." "Welcome, dear," she said, extending her hand. Eleanor shook it mechanically. Caleb stepped in tactfully. "She's still adjusting. The town is quite different from what she's used to." Martha smiled, understanding. "Well, anything you need. You can come here, even if you don't buy anything. I like to chat." Back at the farm, Eleanor went straight to the bedroom. She closed the door and took off her shoes as if shedding a burden. She sat on the bed and stared at the suitcases she still hadn't unpacked. A few clothes were hung up, no sign that this house was hers. She opened one of the drawers and pulled out the photo of Bradley she had hidden at the bottom of the suitcase. She ran her finger over his face, remembering his cologne, his kisses. And then, inevitably, the last phone call. "That's your problem, Ellie. I have a career. You deal with it. Don't ruin everything." She swallowed hard. It was as if he were there, saying those words again. That night, she didn't come out for dinner. Caleb left a plate in the kitchen and followed his routine. When it was already late, she came out of her room and found the plate still warm, covered with a linen cloth. She ate in silence, and for the first time, she washed the dish. The next day, she tried to go out for a walk. She wore a light dress and low heels. The heat quickly made her regret the choice, but still, she kept walking. She saw the cotton field up close, the workers picking carefully, some waving to her kindly. "You don't belong here," she kept repeating to herself. "Don't get used to it." Later, she found Caleb cleaning the barn. He saw her approaching. "Need something?" She hesitated, then said without looking at him, "Can you teach me to make coffee?" Caleb smiled, surprised. "Sure, I thought you'd never ask." "I'm not asking, I'm inquiring." He laughed without mockery. "Then come by tomorrow morning at 6. She widened her eyes. 6? That's when the day starts around here. And for the first time, she responded with something almost like a smile. That night, lying in bed, Eleanor wrote on a piece of paper, "Day 3. I still hate this place." But less than yesterday. She placed the paper inside the drawer next to Bradley's photo, now turned face down. The sky was still painted in dark blue hues when Eleanor stepped out of the bedroom, wearing a silk robe and plush slippers that completely clashed with the surroundings. The wooden floor of the house was cold, and the silence was broken only by the sounds of nature slowly waking up. She entered the kitchen and found Caleb with his back to her, stirring something in the iron kettle. "You really do wake up at 6? She said, still sleepy. "Good morning to you too," he replied without turning around. She pulled out a chair and sat down, watching the firm, almost choreographed gestures with which he prepared the coffee. "So, how do you make it?" Caleb looked over his shoulder and smiled. "First, you learn to grind the beans. We use whole beans here, not store-bought grounds. Of course, because store-bought coffee is inferior, right?" she said sarcastically. "Depends on the taste, but around here we like to smell it from the start." He placed a handful of beans in the manual grinder and offered it to her. "Want to try?" Eleanor hesitated, picked up the grinder with suspicion, and began to turn it. She quickly realized it wasn't that simple. It required strength and patience. "My God, this is an arm workout." Caleb laughed. "Maybe the secret to good coffee is the effort that comes before it." She raised an eyebrow but didn't reply. She just kept turning. After a few minutes, the aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the kitchen. "The hard part's done, now comes the good part," he said, carefully pouring the grounds into a cloth filter. As the water boiled, Eleanor looked around. It was a simple kitchen but extremely well kept. The towels were clean, jars well organized, and the windows slowly let the sun in. "You clean all this by yourself?" "Of course, I live alone, and I like to keep things in order." She was quiet for a few seconds before asking, "Why? Why live alone?" Caleb turned to her, slowly pouring water over the coffee grounds. "My parents died when I was 18. I was left with the farm. Never married until now." Eleanor bit her lip. She hadn't expected such a direct answer. "I'm sorry," she said almost in a whisper. He simply nodded. He served 2 cups and sat across from her. "Careful, it's hot." She picked up the cup with both hands and blew on it before taking the first sip. Her eyes widened slightly. "Wow, this is good, really good." Good coffee is like good people. Sometimes you only notice it when you stop and pay attention. She laughed unintentionally. "Do you always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like you write poetry between picking cotton." He shrugged. "I just say what I think. Not everyone from the country is dumb, Eleanor." She blushed, surprised, not because he was being rude, but because he was right. "I never said you were." "You don't have to. Your look says plenty." Silence. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her eyes. Caleb got up and began washing the cups. "You want to learn how to make eggs tomorrow?" "Maybe. Haven't decided if I want to become a country breakfast expert. Up to you, but are you going to eat something now? No, I've had enough coffee for today. She left the kitchen with a strange feeling in her chest. Something between discomfort and curiosity. Caleb threw her off balance, not because of what he did, but how he did it. Calmly, with dignity, with a tranquility that bordered on irritating. In the following days, Eleanor began waking up early, always under the excuse of seeing how things worked, but it was clear there was more to it. She started observing. The plantation workers took small walks on her own, and even helped Martha at the fabric store one afternoon. To kill time. Martha was all smiles. You've got fine hands, but you'll see the land softens even the snobbiest of hearts. Eleanor pretended not to hear, but smiled inwardly. On a particularly cool night, she stepped onto the porch with a blanket over her shoulders. Caleb was there, sitting in a wooden chair, staring at the stars. "It's cold," she said. "It always gets cold at night here. Have a seat." She sat beside him in silence. "Do you always look at the stars?" "Whenever I can. Reminds me that we're small, that we don't control everything. I used to look out my bedroom window, but back in Beverly Hills it's all artificial light. You forget the sky even exists. Here, it's always there. You just have to look." They stayed, quiet for a while until she asked, "Caleb, why did you agree to marry me?" He took a deep breath before answering. "Your father offered me money. Said you needed a safe place far from gossip, but I didn't accept because of that." She turned to him, surprised. "You didn't?" "No, I agreed because I thought maybe you'd want to choose to stay, and not just be hidden." Eleanor went silent. For the first time, someone seemed to see beyond the spoiled heiress and the scandal she carried in her belly. She stood up, heart racing. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Eleanor." She went in and locked the door, sat on the bed and took a deep breath. In the mirror, for the first time, she didn't just see the rich girl. She saw someone different, someone who might be changing. And in the bottom drawer, the paper from day 3 now had company. Day 6, the coffee is good, his words, even better. On the morning of the 8th day, Eleanor woke up to a note left on the dresser. "Today is Sunday. If you want, Mass starts at 9 a.m. Martha has a blue dress she can lend you. See." She read and reread Caleb's firm handwriting. She thought about ignoring the invitation, but something inside her hesitated. Maybe it was the way he always left the choice in her hands, as if little by little, he were giving back a piece of her own will. She took a bath and went to the fabric shop. Martha welcomed her with enthusiasm and handed her a light blue dress, simple but elegant. Eleanor dressed in silence and looked at herself in the mirror. The cut wasn't like the ones she wore in Beverly Hills, but there was something in that model that softened her expression. At the church, all eyes turned to her when she walked in with Caleb. The small wooden chapel seemed even smaller in the face of the silent murmur of glances and whispers. But Caleb moved forward firmly, hands in his pockets and a calm expression. They sat together, but he didn't touch her, not even out of courtesy. During the sermon, Eleanor looked more at the windows than at the priest. The trees outside danced with the wind, and she thought about what her life would be from now on. There were no more parties, no high heels, no sweet scent of expensive city stores. There was only the sound of the wind and the voice of a man who seemed to see her more clearly than she saw herself. After Mass, Caleb greeted a few people, and she stood beside him, listening to the comments. "So this is your wife?" "Yes, she's adapting well." He replied with a slight smile. She noticed the choice of words. He didn't say she was happy or that she was loving the countryside, just adapting. Somehow that irritated her. On the way back, she broke the silence. "You tell people I'm adapting. But who said I want to adapt? Do you need to?" "I don't know, maybe I just want someone to ask what I really want." He looked at her for a moment without smiling. "All right, what do you want, Eleanor?" She hesitated. The most obvious answer, "Go home." no longer felt so automatic. For a second, she didn't know how to respond. I want to breathe without feeling like I'm hidden. I want to stop feeling guilty for something that wasn't even my fault. I want to remember who I am. Caleb nodded, without judgment. He just walked beside her, in silence. In the days that followed, she started helping with small tasks. She learned to make scrambled eggs with chives, even burning the pan twice. Martha taught her how to hem and make fruit preserves. Eleanor was still clumsy, but she no longer refused to try. One Tuesday afternoon, while cleaning the kitchen cabinets, she found a cardboard box hidden on the top shelf. Curious, she carefully pulled it down and brought it to the table. Inside were old photographs. Caleb as a boy, Caleb as a teenager with his parents, Caleb as an adult harvesting cotton. There was also a yellowed letter, handwritten with delicate handwriting. It was from a girl named Isabel. Before she could read more, Caleb came in through the back door, his boots muddy. "What are you doing?" Eleanor looked up, embarrassed. "Sorry, I found this in the cabinet. I didn't mean to invade anything." He approached and looked at the box. For a moment, his face hardened. "That letter's old. From someone who left. Did you love her?" "I thought I did. But sometimes we love the idea we created of someone." She was silent. That hit deeper than she expected. "Do you still think of her?" "Not more than I think of you." The phrase was said so naturally that Eleanor didn't know how to react. She felt a warmth rise in her cheeks and for the first time, looked away. "Sorry for going through your things," she said, closing the box. Caleb placed his hand on the lid. "It's all right. Sometimes we need to look at the past to understand why we ended up here." She nodded, and they stood there for a few seconds side by side. Later that night, Eleanor wrote on the day's paper, "Day 8. I discovered his past has ghosts too, but unlike me, he's learned to live with them." Before going to sleep, she looked at the wooden ceiling and thought of the baby she carried. For the first time, she caressed her belly with affection, not shame. "We're going to be all right," she whispered, as if making an important promise. On the porch, Caleb was still looking at the stars, but that night he smiled too. The 9th day began with the sound of church bells ringing in the distance. Eleanor stretched in bed lazily, but also with a strange feeling of lightness. It was the first morning she didn't wake up angry at the world. She went down to the kitchen and found Caleb having coffee, his eyes fixed on the newspaper. When he saw her, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Good morning, city girl." She smiled, grabbing an apple from the basket. "Good morning, countryman." Caleb lifted his coffee cup like a toast. It was the kind of inside joke that days ago she would have ignored. Now it felt like a quiet thread of affection. When breakfast was over, Caleb went to the fields and Eleanor decided to walk down the dirt road. She liked the sound of the crickets, the smell of dry leaves, the way the wind messed up her hair. She stopped near the fence and sat down, watching the horses in the distance. There, in the midst of silence and dust, she felt alive. Upon returning, she found Martha on the porch with an envelope in her hands. It was thick, made of expensive paper with her family's crest. "It arrived this morning by mail," said Martha, handing her the letter. Eleanor stood still for a moment. That was the first time she'd received anything from her father since she was sent to the countryside. She went up to the room, closed the door, and sat on the bed before opening the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, written with her father's usual coldness. "Eleanor, I hope you're well settled. I trust you're fulfilling your part of the agreement. Remember, silence is the only currency that keeps our reputation intact. I'm sending a monthly amount for expenses, but I want to know your situation with this man. Is he trustworthy? Is he discreet? Is he fulfilling the arrangement? Respond." In writing with no unnecessary details, Eleanor's stomach turned. It was as if all the progress she'd been making in recent days had been pushed back to the bottom of the pit with a single piece of paper. She folded the letter in anger and shoved it into the drawer, but it kept echoing in her head for the rest of the day. When Caleb returned, sweaty with his sleeves rolled up, she was still on the porch, quiet. "You okay?" She looked at him, thought about lying, but answered, "I got a letter from my father." Caleb nodded without asking anything else. "Want to talk about it?" he said, sitting next to her. She took a deep breath. "He wants to know if you're trustworthy, if you're holding up your end of the deal." Caleb turned his face, staring at the horizon. "And you? Do you think I am?" She hesitated. The silence between them grew heavier. "I think you've been more honest with me than anyone I've ever met." He nodded slowly. "Your father sent you here to hide a problem, but you're not a problem, Eleanor." Her throat tightened. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. But those words hit something she'd been hiding for a long time. "He never asked if I wanted to come. Just sent me, as if my will didn't exist." Caleb got up, went into the house, and came back with a sheet of paper and a pen. "Write to him, but write whatever you want, not what he expects." She took the paper with trembling hands and sat there staring at the blank page. Later, alone, she wrote, "Father, I'm fine. The house is simple but clean and welcoming. Caleb is more honest than any of the men in our circle. He respects me. He doesn't force me to do anything. And as for me, I'm starting to remember that I'm a person, not a piece in your game. Sincerely, Eleanor." She folded the paper and sealed it in the envelope. She knew this might trigger an explosive reaction, but for the first time, she didn't care. That night, during dinner, Caleb talked about the weather, the cotton crop, and the festival. That would happen in town in 2 weeks. "There's live music, little booths, good food. Would you like to go?" Eleanor thought. Part of her still felt out of place, as if she didn't belong there. But another part wanted to live a little outside the shadow of her past. "I do. I really do." Caleb smiled slightly and served her a bit more rice. Before going to sleep, Eleanor wrote on the daily paper, "Day 9. I received a letter that made me bleed inside. But it also made me react. For the first time, I answered with my own voice, and I was heard by myself." She looked at the ceiling, tenderly caressing her belly. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves and the house felt more alive than ever. The 2 weeks leading up to the festival flew by. Eleanor, to her own surprise, began to form a routine. She woke up early, made her bed, had breakfast with Caleb, and sometimes helped Martha chop vegetables or sweep the floor. She still made clumsy mistakes like knocking over buckets or confusing flour with sugar, but she no longer complained like before. Caleb observed these small changes with a discreet smile. He never commented, but seemed to notice every gesture of hers. Each time she sat at the table willingly, each time she laughed, even if by accident. On the eve of the festival, Martha came into Eleanor's room with a sky blue dress in her hands. "It's not new, but it belonged to my daughter. I think it'll fit you well." Eleanor, who was about to refuse by instinct, looked at the dress more carefully. It was simple, with short sleeves and a fitted waist. There was a delicate embroidery along the hem. "Thank you," she said, a little awkwardly. "I think it's pretty." On the morning of the festival, Caleb appeared with combed hair and a light shirt she had never seen before. He almost looked like a different man. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Eleanor hesitated but eventually accepted. They got into the pickup truck and followed the dirt road, where the sun filtered through the trees and the wind kicked up golden dust. The little town was all decorated with colorful streamers and flowers hanging from the windows. The scent of roasted corn, cotton candy, and cornmeal cake filled the air. "I never thought a place so small could feel so full of life," said Eleanor, amazed. "Maybe it's because you're looking with different eyes," Caleb replied. They went to the shooting booth, the fishing stand, and the corn cake stall. Eleanor, laughing, got chocolate-covered carrot cake all over her face. Caleb wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin, so naturally that she was left speechless. "You're different from what I imagined," she said after a while. "And you're better than you wanted to admit," he replied, serious but with tenderness. Later they listened to the local band play at the gazebo. Couples danced in the square lit by string lights. Caleb extended his hand to her. "Want to dance?" Eleanor looked around. She had never danced like that in public without worrying about photographers or society columnists. But there, no one knew her full name. No one expected anything from her. I really do," she answered, taking his hand. They danced slowly, a bit awkward at first, until they found a quiet rhythm. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of his hand on her back, the subtle scent coming from his clean shirt, the soft beat of his heart near hers. When the music ended, she opened her eyes slowly, like someone waking from a dream. Caleb was still looking at her, as if trying to memorize that moment. "You seem like someone else," he murmured. "Maybe I'm becoming myself." Right after, a town photographer with a camera around his neck approached the couple. "Can I take a picture of you two? It'll go on the town's mural." Eleanor was about to refuse out of reflex, but Caleb nodded, looking at her. "Just one picture, Ellie. No one from outside will see it." She took a deep breath and smiled. The photo was taken right there, under the lights, with them still half embraced, still wearing the scent of the festival on their clothes. On the way back, home, the night silence seemed to welcome them both. When they entered, Eleanor said, "Thank you for today, it was unforgettable." Caleb stopped in the middle of the room and turned to her. "I never thought you were easy, Eleanor, but you're brave. A lot of people are afraid of letting themselves change." She didn't answer. She just walked over to him and, on impulse, rested her face against his chest. He hugged her slowly, carefully, like someone holding something rare. They stayed like that for a few seconds until she pulled away without saying anything else. She climbed the stairs in silence. Later, alone in her room, she wrote, Day 23. We danced. We smiled. I took a photo without hiding. Today I felt something I hadn't felt since all of this began. Hope. She folded the paper gently and placed it in the box where she kept all her notes from her time there. She touched her belly, which was now beginning to show beneath the fabric of the blue dress. The baby seemed quiet, but present, almost as if it had danced in that square too. The first April rains came down hard, flooding the fields and covering the skies with a melancholy gray. The cotton crop held on as best it could, but Caleb spent his days with muddy boots and a furrowed brow, checking row after row of soaked plants. Eleanor watched him from the window. She had started to worry about things she used to ignore: the weather, the harvest, Caleb's mood when he returned home. She already felt like part of the routine. She sewed with Martha in the morning, read old books in the afternoon, and at night wrote about the feelings that day by day tangled up inside her. It was no longer just nostalgia for the past. It was also a growing curiosity about the future. On one of those rainy afternoons, she found Caleb on the porch, leaning against the railing with a cup of coffee. "Is everything going to be okay? With the crop?" she asked, sitting beside him. He sighed. "I don't know. Too much water kills the cotton, and the forecast isn't good." She stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "If you need help with anything, even if I get in the way more than I help, I want to try." Caleb turned his face slowly, surprised. "You really are changing, huh? Maybe I'm just waking up." They both laughed quietly. It was a silent, almost shy bond, but increasingly present. That night, the power went out. The storm knocked down the power lines and left the house submerged in damp darkness. Caleb showed up with 2 lit candles and a blanket over his shoulders. "Let's go to the kitchen. It's warmer there." They sat in front of the wood-burning stove. Eleanor curled up in a chair, Caleb sitting cross-legged on the floor. The heat from the fire cast soft shadows on the walls. "You know," she began, fiddling with her sleeve, "I used to dream of parties in Paris, jewelry inherited from my grandmother, and a house by the sea. And now?" he asked. She looked at him, serious. "Now I dream of peace." Nodded slowly. "Peace is harder to find than gold," she smiled sadly. "I always thought I'd marry for love. But after everything, I wonder if I even knew what that was." Caleb stayed silent. The firewood crackled gently. "Do you think we can Learn to love someone over time? She asked, almost in a whisper. He took a while to answer. I think so. If there's respect, and if both are willing to listen. She rested her head on the edge of the chair, looking at the flame in the stove. I listen to you. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with a small wooden box. I want to show you something. He opened the box in front of her. Inside were old photographs, yellowed letters, a worn wedding ring. It belonged to my mother. She died when I was little. My father was so lonely he turned into a hard man. Eleanor picked up one of the photos. The woman smiled next to a dark-haired boy. You were handsome even back then. Caleb laughed, embarrassed. She used to say we have to keep what's precious even if it hurts to remember. Eleanor returned the photo to the box, carefully. I think I never really kept anything of real value. Everything I had was expensive, but not precious. He looked at her with that calm way she already recognized as sincere. You have something precious now, inside you. She placed a hand on her belly and stayed silent for a long time. Later, in her room, she sat on the bed with the faint candlelight still glowing. She wrote, Day 29. I discovered that love isn't just passion or promises. Maybe it's presence. Maybe it's sitting in the dark and sharing silence. Maybe I'm learning to love. She folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the others. The wind slammed against the windows, but what was forming inside her was stronger than any storm. The next morning, the power came back, but Caleb was acting strange, quiet, distant. During breakfast, he barely looked at her. Eleanor felt a chill in her stomach. Did something happen? She asked, trying not to sound insecure. He shook his head. I got a letter from the bank. If we lose more of the crop, I don't know how I'm going to pay the loan. She swallowed hard. Is there anything I can do? Caleb looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up, grabbed his hat, and went out to the field. Eleanor stayed seated at the table, the cup in her hands. For the first time, she felt like praying. Not for herself, but for him, for that land, for that home she was beginning to call her own. The following days were tense, filled with a silence Eleanor no longer found strange, but that now hurt. Caleb grew more distant by the day, and she could tell it wasn't coldness, it was worry. The crop was on the brink, and with it, all the plans he carried on his shoulders. Martha tried to lighten the mood with cakes and funny childhood stories about Caleb, but Eleanor barely smiled. She began to dream of her father's mansion, with its cold hallways and the distant sounds of servants. She woke up with a heavy heart. For the first time, it wasn't homesickness, it was fear. Fear of losing what she had built there. On the morning of May 3rd, Caleb left early and took longer than usual to return. When the clock showed nearly 5 p.m., she saw him walking up the dirt road, head down, shoulders slumped. She ran to the porch. Caleb! He looked up, his eyes were red. Dry tears stained his face. Eleanor ran down the steps and reached him. What happened? I lost everything, he said, voice barely audible. The bank's going to take the farm. She felt the world spin. She clung to his arm. No, there has to be something we can do. We can't. Not now. Caleb shook his head. There's no way out. I tried, Eleanor. I swear I tried everything. She hugged him tightly. For the first time, he didn't try to be strong. He cried, in her arms like a lost boy. That night, she wrote one more page in her diary. Day 32. Today, I lost a house, but found a home. Love doesn't live in walls, but in the arms that hold you when everything falls apart. The next day, she made a decision. She put on her best simple dress, tied her hair up firmly, and walked down to the station. She bought a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. It was the first time Caleb saw her in a blue dress, holding a purse, her face full of resolve. Where are you going? To fix what needs fixing. He frowned. Alone. Yes. He stepped closer. Eleanor, I don't want you to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for us. She said no more. She boarded the Train without looking back. Los Angeles seemed even bigger than the last time. The busy streets, the yellow cabs, the smell of cigarette smoke and expensive perfume, all of it felt like a distant memory from a life that was no longer hers. When she arrived at the mansion, she was greeted by one of the butlers who widened his eyes at the sight of her pregnant. "Miss Eleanor? Take me to my father." Mr. Whitmore was in his library, as always. When he saw his daughter, he dropped the newspaper with a snap. "What are you doing here? Are you out of your mind? And in that state?" "I came to negotiate, Father." He laughed, incredulous. "Negotiate? You're in no position to demand anything. But you are. And you know how much a story like mine, if it got out, could tarnish your precious name. The abandoned pregnant daughter, married to a poor farmer, bankrupt." He fell silent, his eyes cold. "What do you want?" "I want you to buy the farm's debt. Transfer it to my name. I'll take care of it. Alone." He walked slowly toward her. "And in return?" "In return, I'll never set foot here again. I'll never use your name. I'll never be a threat to your reputation again." There was a long silence. The man studied his daughter like an investor assessing a risky asset. Finally, he nodded. "You have more courage than I imagined, and you have less heart than I remembered." When she returned 10 days later, Caleb was fixing the front gate. When he saw her, he dropped the hammer. "You came back." She walked toward him, her face tired but serene. "I came back. The farm is mine now. We won't lose it anymore." He looked like he couldn't believe it. "What did you do?" "The only thing I still could do for love." He pulled her into a tight embrace, speechless. For the first time, Eleanor cried, not from sadness, but from relief, from coming home. In the weeks that followed, Caleb and Eleanor rebuilt the OI farm together. A new kind of spring began there. She learned how to tend the crops, to manage accounts, to listen more than she spoke. He learned that loving also meant giving in, sharing decisions, making room for her dreams. On June 17th, at 4 a.m., Eleanor went into labor. Caleb rushed to the room and held her hand tightly. Martha helped as best she could, and at sunrise, a baby girl cried for the first time. "What will her name be?" Caleb asked, emotional. Eleanor smiled, sweaty and exhausted. "Hope." A few years later, the simple house had become a home full of life. Children ran through the halls. Caleb, hands dirty with soil, would show up on the porch at the end of the day. And Eleanor, her hair in a bun, greeted him with a kiss and a smile. The farm thrived, but more importantly, love thrived. In the last entry of her diary, Eleanor wrote, "Today, I realized that the train I boarded years ago didn't take me away from my life. It brought me straight to it. And here, where the road ends, is where my heart began."
If this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours, take a moment to subscribe to the channel right now. Here, every story is crafted to warm your soul and remind you that love can transform everything. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when life surprised you in a way that seemed impossible? Share your story with us in the comments. Let's build a community full of beautiful and inspiring stories. Thank you so much for being part of this emotional journey with me. A big hug, and see you in the next story. I promise it will be even more unforgettable.